Hello everyone. My name is Don Knuth. Today I have the great privilege of interviewing Ed Feigenbaum for oral history, where we hope to reach people generations from now and also people of today. I'm going to try to ask a zillion questions about things that I wish I could have asked people who unfortunately are dead now, so that students and general scientific people, people with general interest in the world, historians and so on in the future, will have some idea as to what Ed was really like, even though none of us are going to be around forever. Now, this is the second part of a two-phase study. Ed grilled me a couple of weeks ago, and now it's my turn to do him. I hope I can do half as well as he did for me, and I'd like to get right into it. But first of all, sort of for organization, my plan, who knows if we'll carry it out, is to do a little bit first that's chronological in order to set the scenes for his whole life, but then most of my questions are probably going to be cross-cutting that go through the years. So, but first of all, Ed, do you have some remarks you would like to start with, or should I get right into the? You know?
No, Don. Why don't you just get right into it? I have lots to say.
Right. Well, so I'm always very interested in the origins of things and the seeds, and you know, I spend more time reading chapter 1 of a book than chapter 10 always, and so you know, you were born, and I'd like to get you, you know, sort of launch this whole thing by saying, how did you get, you know, even before you went to college, what was it like growing up? I understand you were born in New Jersey.
So I was born in Weehawken, New Jersey, which is a town on the Palisades opposite New York. In fact, it's the place where the Lincoln Tunnel dives under the water and comes up in New York. And then my parents moved up the Palisades 4 miles to a town called North Bergen. And there I lived until I was 16 and went off to Carnegie Tech. To try to paint a picture for you of those early times, let me paint it culturally first, and then let me paint it as I saw it as a scientific kid. Culturally, it was from a Jewish family in the Jewish culture of New York. They happened to be living in New Jersey, but they had come from New York and Brooklyn, and they the same Jewish culture that you know a lot about through many other people who have come up into science and other professions. That means there was a great deal of emphasis. That Jewish culture thinks of itself as the people of the book. And so there's a tremendous focus on learning and the book and reading and all that. So I think from what I hear, it's hard to remember back when you were a tiny kid, but I hear that I got to learn to read very early. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the story of my life. That's, but anyway, it was a middle class to lower middle class family culture. Nobody was very rich. We certainly weren't in my family. And it was all a public school education.
Did you have a large family?
No. It was myself, born in 1936, and then my brother, I don't know, you call him my half-brother or something. He, in end of 46, my biological father actually died when I was an infant. He died of an accident or something. Not quite sure in the family what he died of, but he was gone by 37. So then my mother remarried, and then after World War II, that's when my brother came, because they were holding off, not knowing what was going to happen during World War II. I think also, although it doesn't relate to my professional career, I think there was really quite an impact of being a Depression baby, and quite an impact of being a kid who grew up through World War II. It wasn't like, let's say, my wife Penny, who actually lived in Tokyo during the air raids. It wasn't anything like that, but it was still a major impact on your life to be living through this gigantic war effort.
Upheaval.
So anyway, what sticks in mind is my stepfather, whose name was Fred Rockman, R-A-C-H-M-A-N. Fred was he was really the only one around in the family who had any college education, CCNY, but he used to take me off to the American Museum of Natural History, which was right across the river, go into New York on the bus and go up on the subway, and every month the Hayden Planetarium would change its program. They don't do it anymore because of cost reasons, so they change maybe every 3 months or 6 months, but every month we'd go over and see the new program, and we would examine one more room of the American Museum of Natural History. Tremendous impact on my life, especially the astronomy part, which is not unusual for kids, getting into science via astronomy. The other thing I remember from those early days, I'm talking about sort of 10 years old or less, is being a young science nerd right then and there. I mean, it's amazing how fast that develops. That means reading books like, well, many times you'll hear our generation of scientists talk about being motivated to go into science because they read Microbe Hunters. Or in my case, well, I did read that, but in my case, it was making sure I read Scientific American every month. As a kid.
Now, I noticed that you were born 2 years earlier than I was, but you entered college 4 years earlier than I did. So you must have picked up 2 years on me somehow. How did this happen?
Acceleration through school, the teachers wanting to put me up a class to keep my mind busy, and my parents going along with that. I know that my daughter doesn't allow that with her children. She wants her children maturing at the same rate as everyone else matures. But my parents were okay with. So I graduated high school when I was 16.
So like you skipped fifth grade or something?
Somewhere in there. I don't remember which ones. There were two of them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So. Being born in January, it tends to set people back, so maybe they could pretend that you were born in December, and that saves a year too.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, yeah. So studying science is right there at your fingertips in New York. You know, I had to go to Chicago. I could go once every 3 years to see a planetarium. But what about languages? Did you also study? Like I noticed. That when we'll get into it later, but when you were in Russia, you spoke German to some of the scientists, so you must have studied some languages also.
Well, languages. I'm not very good at languages, so I tend to shy away from the things I'm not very good at, including, for example, the tragedy that. Since Penny's Japanese, and since we were married in the mid-'70s and I travel a lot to Japan, I should have learned Japanese back then, and it would have been very fruitful in my life and would have made my life much better, but I never did. So where did German come in? Well, the family spoke Yiddish, and Yiddish is a kind of a variant of German. So I had some of the words in my head, and then I had to do something in high school. You have to take a language, so I just did German because it was easier than doing French or something else, Latin. They didn't have, by that time they weren't teaching Latin, I think, in my high school. And so I had some German stuck away in my head from high school German. Then came these trips to the Soviet Union in 1960 and 64. There I really attempted to learn some Russian before I went there. I actually hired a graduate student at UCLA. I was working at Rand Corporation in the summer, and I hired a UCLA graduate student to teach me Russian in the summer. But there's an interesting lesson there for AI people, cognitive scientists and all of that, which is the student taught me the rules of grammar, of Russian grammar, because that's what he knew and that's what his expertise was. And therefore, when I got to Russia, I could say nothing perfectly, which is the stupidity of just using the rules.
Yes.
So I'm not real good at languages.
That may be the same reason I'm not good at language.
Oh, let me also tell you an interesting little anecdote about languages. In graduate school, in the PhD program, we still had a requirement for a language at Carnegie Tech in those days. I was kind of pushing for, why isn't my language Fortran or IT or something like that? That's my language. No, it had to be a real human language. So I did German. Well, what I took as my text was Freud. Well, Freud is really hard. And I didn't pass that German exam. So next time around, I said, okay, I'm just going to do a statistics book. And of course, math is the same in every language. So it was trivial to translate the statistics book. And so I passed my German exam.
Only one language at Carnegie?
Yeah, one language.
Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to add one more thing about growing up.
Yeah.
There was one key thing that I didn't mention before. I mean, absolutely key. When I mentioned that my stepfather, Fred, was a CCNY graduate, he was actually in accounting. And so he went to work after his degree. He went to work as an accountant in a firm and had and owned a Monro Calculator. Initially, the Monro Calculator with the little flip thing where you flip the digits from position to position, but later on a motorized one, which was at that point not a Monro but a Frieden, I think.
Okay.
Well, I was absolutely fascinated by these calculators and learned to use them with great facility. That was one of my great skills. In contrast to other friends of mine whose great skills were being on the tennis team, like they would get varsity letters on the tennis team, they would be on the basketball team. Not me. Me, it was the calculator. So I would actually give demonstrations of this calculator by dragging this heavy object. I mean, really heavy object. If anyone in the video audience wants to see one, come to the Computer History Museum and you'll see some of these 30-pound things, dragging it on the bus down to school so I could take it down to school and show people how to do this kind of stuff. So I was kind of primed to like calculators, and that sets up that...
Genetically, or something. So you mentioned microbe hunters and astronomy, and calculators, but when you finally got to Carnegie, you majored in electrical engineering. Did
Yeah.
you also have some, like radio or something?
Yes, that's right, all the normal kit stuff. Like my parents didn't want me to listen to the radio when I should be going to sleep, and there was the Knicks games from the Madison Square Garden. So I made myself a little crystal radio with earphones. They thought it was a great science kit that I was doing. Actually, I was just putting together this crystal radio so I could listen to the Knicks game.
Okay.
But why did I go into electrical engineering? That's partly because in this middle class to lower middle class culture, people were focused on getting a job that would make money for the long run. And no one ever told me there was a job. For example, no one ever told me that there was a job called physicist. No one ever told me there was a job called symphony conductor.
Uh-huh.
No one ever mentioned that was something you could do. So engineering was something that if you're good at math and science, you can make a living at it.
Okay, so you did have some kind of a role model. You knew somebody who was an electrical engineer?
No, just talking around.
People, vocational exams,
Yeah.
they would say, this looks like a good career for your skill set.
Yeah, and I think there's the other side of that coin too, in talking about vocational counselor or college, even a college prep counselor, because I was going to a school, of the different schools I had North Bergen didn't have a high school, so I had options to go to different schools, and the one I chose was the one that was known for having a college prep orientation. So they had a college prep advisor. I'm amazed that here I am going through high school with straight A's in math, science, all the geeky stuff. She never once mentioned the initials MIT. Never once, not a single time. Never mentioned the word Harvard or nothing. So Carnegie Tech came up because they were advertising these Westinghouse scholarships. And wow, my family didn't have much money, so that was a way, why don't I apply for one? Well, I didn't actually get a Westinghouse scholarship. I got the equivalent of it, which was a Carnegie Tech scholarship. Incidentally, at that time, $680 a year. Compare that to Stanford's tuition.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, really a lot of money.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say, I don't know if you remember when you took these aptitude tests, did it also tell you what would be your worst career? I remember for me it was veterinarian.
I just really don't remember it at all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but Carnegie must have been very, very competitive. But anyway, so certainly, I don't think this advisor would have advised many students to go to Carnegie at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
But it turns out life is strange. Life is interesting set of choices. The decision to go to Carnegie Tech was a fantastically good decision. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have met Herb Simon, I wouldn't have met Alan Newell, I wouldn't have met Alan Perlis. But it was just a pure piece of luck at the time, just because they were doing PR on a scholarship and no one mentioned MIT to me.
Okay. Yeah.
I might have gone to MIT and I might have met Minsky and I might have met McCarthy.
Or whatever, you might have gone into biology or something, but anyway, but certainly you thrived. You had a perfect match where you went. But getting a little ahead of the story. But I think actually Simon came to the business school rather than so let's as an undergraduate you're studying power systems and various things that electrical engineers studied at that time.
Yeah.
Not computers or.
Right.
Is that correct? So now you go through 4 years of traditional studies and I suppose electronics.
Interesting time. It was the time of the switchover, at least at Carnegie. Maybe MIT and Stanford maybe have been a little bit ahead of them, but at Carnegie it was the time of the switchover from power engineering to electronics. Mm-hmm. And the only electronics offered was a senior sequence in electronics. Mm-hmm. That's it. Before that, it was all power engineering and
Right.
and thermodynamics, but thermodynamics wasn't physics thermodynamics, it was steam tables.
Steam tables.
Yeah,
Okay.
pressure boilers and things like that.
Right, yeah.
So at the end of my freshman year, I was doing really well, but I got the feeling like there's got to be more to a university than this. So I got the permission of my undergraduate advisor, who was a really broad-minded guy, a wonderful guy. He ended up, I think, being provost at Carnegie Tech, Ed Schatz. I had looked around in the catalog for what's interesting to take in this university. Well, this university was pretty broad. It had an art school.
Mm-hmm.
It had a great drama department,
Yeah.
which incidentally led to ACT in San Francisco.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Bill Ball he was a student while I was, and then he later came out and started ACT. But it had a great drama department, a great painting and design department, architecture, and so on. So there were a lot of things to look at. And I looked through the catalog and found a course called Ideas in Social Change. I don't know why that hit my fancy, but I asked my advisor, could I take that? And he said, sure. He said, with your grades, you can take anything you want. So it turned out to be in a place called the Graduate School of Industrial Administration, sort of a relatively brand new building. I guess it had been started by Mellon, or the Mellon Foundation or something, and they had gotten one really top-notch economist, Lee Bach, to be the founding dean, and Lee Bach had chosen a couple other people to help him bootstrap this school from nothing into something. And one of those people was his friend Herbert Simon, who was a behavioral scientist who had published administrative behavior at that point, and was also doing mathematical work in behavioral science models. And the other one was Cooper, who, remember Charles and Cooper linear programming applications. So they bootstrapped the school into existence. That school, it was a miraculous decade or so. In between that time, well, they started the school in the late 40s, early 50s. And between that time and 1965 or so, they had already produced the material for 4 Nobel Prize winners, including Herb Simon, Franco Modigliani, and a couple others.
Okay, so
Dick Cyert became president of Carnegie Tech, Carnegie Mellon.
Uh-huh.
Amazing place. It was partly a school in mathematical economics, partly a school in mathematical behavioral science, mathematical models in the behavioral science, and partly an MBA program to earn money for them. And as an MBA program, they were the first ones to introduce quantitative methods, namely to take a stance against the Harvard case study method of learning what an industrial administrator would need to know.
So instead of case studies, they're talking about...
They were talking about simplex method. They were
I see.
talking about ideas in social change, which was taught by an instructor who had just come from Yale, Jim March, who's now a retired famous Stanford professor. March started out that course by giving us von Neumann and Morgenstern to read, the game theory book. Wow. I mean, for a sophomore, this is really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So,
hard science, or something quantitative rather than
yeah.
qualitative.
Yeah.
Now, as an undergraduate, then you're taking this as elective.
Yeah.
As an elective, and Simon is a regular faculty member or a visitor?
No, Simon was one of the founding members of the school, and he was, of course, a full professor, but he was also associate dean of the school. At Stanford, we might call him associate dean for research.
Okay.
He wasn't really a very good dean in that we know that. Experimentally, Lee Bach took a sabbatical one year and left Herb to run the school. And within, I think, a third of the way through the year, it was clear Herb couldn't run that school. So they gave it to somebody else to run.
As an undergraduate, did you have any other thing that, besides meeting Herb, that shaped your future life? I mean, for example, somehow you would have the ability to be a good dean yourself. Would you have any? Were you leader of student organizations or anything that gave you some experience?
I actually did all of that. All of that extracurricular stuff was part of my life. Partly because it was interesting, and partly because, like I said before, I was good at that sort of thing, and I wasn't very good at the football team, or, it was. So I was head of the. I got to be head of the the name of the magazine was called Carnegie Technical, but it was like a Scientific American for Carnegie stuff.
That's interesting.
I think you did that too.
Well, Case just started it in my senior year, so I had 1 year experience doing that. So Carnegie was ahead of us. There was a Sigma Xi honorary. There was some kind of no, I'm sorry. I can't think of the name of it, but for journalism, there was an organization.
So yeah, I did that sort of thing.
That sort of thing. So
I also did student body president, I think.
Oh wow!
No
voted for you, too.
No particular reason. That was the last election I ever ran for, and the last election I ever won.
Yeah. No, I ran for student government, but based on the fact that I'd published an article in Mad Magazine, but I lost miserably. So you even won elections. That's amazing. Okay, but had you done writing also in high school?
Nothing sticks in mind. Maybe it's possible that I wrote something for the student news. Maybe I was on the student newspaper. It just doesn't stick in mind. Writing became a skill that I decided early on I really had to do well. Now, don't ask me why I thought that. Maybe it's because I was so engrossed in reading, but in fact, it bothers, it's a hindrance actually to be a perfectionist on the writing end of things, because then you face a piece of blank paper a little bit scared. You never know if it's going to come out right. And Herb Simon used to try to convince me that, hey, wait a second, this is like debugging a program. You write a lousy draft, and then the next one is better, and the next one is better, and the next one is better. But it doesn't feel like that when I sit down to write something.
Well, engineers are usually faulted on their writing skills. Apparently Carnegie took that to heart and at least had enough in place that you could come out of your undergraduate years there as a good writer.
Yeah. In one of these other broadening things I tried to do when I was an undergraduate, I actually took a course over in the art school from a novelist, trying to remember her name right now, but, oh God, I'm blocking on it. But she wrote many novels, of which I think her most famous one was called David the King. And she was quite good as a novelist, and I thought, oh, this is a lot more interesting than engineering. I ought to be a novelist. And I started to write some things in this class, and she convinced me toward the end, I think it was 2 semesters I took that, she convinced me toward the end of the term that I really should continue on being an engineer, so I had a day job. And if I wanted to be a writer, I could write as a night job. And I think she was right.
A lot of people, their teachers must have been right. So, so you graduate in 1956. And at this point, there's no computers yet at Carnegie Institute of Technology. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's right.
It's also true at Case Institute of Technology, which I entered in 1956.
No computers. First computer showed up in the summer of '56. It showed up along with Alan Perlis and Joe Smith and Hal Van Zorn in a tiny little office in the basement of the Graduate School of Industrial Administration. And there's actually a story about that. Lee Bach, I told it again at the Carnegie Mellon 50th anniversary celebration of that event. But it's also written up by Lee Bach in that special issue of the ACM that honors the IBM 650. But the math department didn't want to have anything to do with it. The physics department didn't want to have anything to do with it. It was Herb Simon who loved it. And Herb Simon found Al Perlis and gave the graduate school, Lee Bach and Herb Simon gave it space in the basement of the Graduate School of Industrial Administration, and that's how it got launched.
So that would be a big difference from MIT, I guess, where several computers have been around for
that's right,
for ages. Right. Okay. Now, but when you did get a computer, when did you first see it? Then, were you there? Were you there in the summer?
No, in the summer. Well, I would have to go back a little bit to tell you sort of a born again story, which I will. But to answer your question directly, I was working at IBM in the summer of 1956 in the 590 Madison Avenue World Headquarters location, except around the corner in a brownstone, where there were several things going on. On the first floor, there was the graduate student, even though I wasn't a graduate student, I was on my way to becoming a graduate student, and IBM was nice enough to consider me a graduate student. But there were other graduate students in that first summer program that IBM ever offered, where they wanted to hire graduate students for the summer to train them up. They sent me to, first, they sent me to Watson Laboratory at Columbia University to learn the 650, because by that time it was sort of public knowledge that Carnegie Tech would be getting a 650. So as long as it was going to be getting a 650, I ought to know how to program it. Then that took a couple weeks, I think, and then they sent me back to 590 Madison Avenue, where they were giving 704 classes. Incidentally, at the IBM Watson Laboratory, an interesting thing that most people don't have the experience of is learning how to do wired programming, not symbolic programming, but actually plugboard programming. Yes, with 16 registers. That was a phenomenally interesting thing for a kid, for a geeky kid. But anyway, 650 and 704, and then around the corner to the brownstone to do some real work for the summer. That's how I met Bacchus. Bacchus, for example, was his group was on the 4th floor of the brownstone. And one day, and they used to have seminars for us graduate students. Once a week, somebody would come down from above and tell us things. And one day, Bacchus came down. So somebody came down, turned out to be Bacchus. I didn't know him at the time. Came down and said to us kids, hey, you don't have to write these things CLA anymore for clear and add, or 005 for add to the register. You can write algebraic formulas, and our programs will translate the formulas. Get it? Fortran. And wow, this was big news to us kids. Bob Beamer came down from, people don't remember Bob Beamer, but he was a fantastic programmer. He came down from upstairs somewhere and showed us tricks, all kinds of numerical tricks you could do on computers, or coding tricks whereby you could save several registers in memory. And that was amazing to us, kids.
Okay, so these were...
So then I finished the summer and went back to Carnegie. That's where the machine was there.
So already then, when you're seeing your first computers, you're also seeing the world-class programmers of those computers. So you get to start at the top, basically, instead of from manuals.
Well, let me go back and tell you, though, that the preliminary to that story, because it's the one that I tell again and again and again. It's in 10 different papers of mine. And Herb Simon actually quotes it in his autobiography. And it also happens to be true, which is nice. Stories aren't always true.
Well, I'll have to remember to ask you that. Is this true?
Yeah. No.
I understand.
But I had gotten linked up with Herb. After Jim March's course, I started to do, my avocation other than engineering was to do behavioral science things. And in fact, I did, one summer I worked for March doing, led to my first published paper. It was studies of small group problem solving, where the small group was making a decision and we were studying them behind one-way glass. So you could see into the room and measure things about what they were doing and so on. One of the people I got to know that summer happened to be writing a book with Jim March in the room next door to where we were doing all these experiments. I was doing the experiments, and Jim and a guy named Herb Simon were writing a book, the famous book called March and Simon Organizations. So I got to know Herb, and not only got to know him, but got to realize that this is a totally extraordinary person. I mean, this is not your ordinary person you meet. This is a remarkable person, and even a young kid like me got to know that. I got to feel that. Well, Herb was giving a course in Carnegie Tech had semesters, and he was giving a 2-semester course called Mathematical Models in the Social Sciences. And in fact, he had published a book on that called Models of Man.
Okay.
If you've ever seen it. It's a collection of Herb's papers on various kinds of mathematical and differential equations models, difference equations models, statistical models, stochastic rats, things like that. And so I was there to learn all that. Oh, Bush-Mosteller models you probably heard of in learning models. So I can tell you the story of what happened with Herb, but I can also want to note that if you read Herb's autobiography, he tells the story of that fall as a fall in which the ideas of the first heuristic program are coming together. Newell moved to Pittsburgh in September, I believe it was September of 1955, and he and Simon really got to work.
Okay, let me try to unscramble the dates. So like you're a junior.
This is when I'm starting my senior year.
You're starting your senior year, 55, 56, and Newell is arriving from
Rand Corporation.
From the West Coast, and I understand Newell had been studying the same kind of thing at Rand, the way pilots make decisions.
That's correct.
And so and Newell had a mathematical background as well. So he was trying to make models of these things as well. So he and Simon were a perfect team.
They met each other when Simon was consulting for Rand. Simon was a management science and operations research consultant, occasional consultant at Rand, and met Newell. Newell was doing this decision-making having to do with air traffic control, well, not civilian air traffic control, but military radar stuff. Newell had gotten intrigued with the computer side of things, not the human side of things, because they were simulating these environments. And maybe it was the first great big simulation, but it was Rand's system development division, later turned into a company called System Development Corporation, which developed all this. It got too big for Rand, and they spun it off as a company. Newell, so he and Simon and a programmer at Rand, now of course a legendary programmer, Cliff Shaw, now dead too, were talking about how these machines, which appeared to be calculators, could do anything. And of course, from Turing, you knew that they could do anything, more or less, given certain constraints. They could do anything. So Newell and Shaw wrote a paper, I think it was 1954, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was published in 55, on how to build a chess-playing program. Simon wasn't involved with that particular paper. Oliver Selfridge from MIT dropped in out of the blue, and he gave a paper at Rand on recognizing X's from O's.
I see.
Oh, God, that's amazing. A machine can do that? Of course, that was the sort of the birth of optical character recognition, and like any good AI field, it spins off and becomes its own field by the mid-'60s. Well, Newell once told me that was the strongest influence on his early career, was that Selfridge talk. Well, he and Simon had been talking about ways of not only building individual models, but building a kind of a system of how to approach these kind of problems. Simon, meanwhile, had published 2 key papers. One was called, these are absolutely seminal papers for AI, and AI people never read them because they're in another literature. Simon published a paper, and they're both in Models of Man. One paper is called A Behavioral Theory of Rational Choice, in which he introduced satisficing as opposed to optimizing. And the other is called Rational Choice and the Structure of the Environment, which is to say that a lot of what goes into human decision-making has to do with the specifics of how the environment is configured, not the generalities. And he uses in a later publication, he uses the metaphor of the ant on the beach. The ant is actually the ant is pursuing sugar on the beach. The ant is actually a very simple problem-solving system, goal-directed, looking for sugar. But the path of the ant seems to be very complicated because the ant happens to be going around every little grain of sand that is like a boulder for the ant. So when you look at a complex pattern of behavior, there are simple mechanisms that could be underneath. And let's go for the simple mechanisms. So, as I was saying, Simon writes about this period in his autobiography, and he mentions a specific date, December 15th, 1955, as the date when it all came together. And what does it mean to come together? It means that they actually put together a on-paper program, he and Newell, which quickly got implemented in a language called IPL1, which was not a language that ran on any computer. It was the first list processing language, but it ran in their heads.
Okay.
And it was sort of tested on a group of students and other faculty who sat in a big classroom, and when certain decisions came around, they would raise their hand, go down this branch. And
Perfect way to study behavioral models of human beings too. Okay.
Yeah. So then it was Christmas break, December 15th. Meant we're in the middle of, it was just starting or in the middle of Christmas break. We get back from Christmas break, and we had a few weeks left in the semester before the semester ended. So we were still going to class. So Herb walks in to our seminar. Incidentally, the seminar was like 6 people. I don't exactly remember who was in the seminar, but I was. So it's not huge. He walks in and he says these famous words. Over Christmas, Alan Newell and I invented a thinking machine. Well, that just blew the minds of thinking machine. What could he possibly mean by that? Well, we sort of knew what thinking was, but what does he mean by machine, and what does he mean by thinking machine? So in answer to that, Herb just gave us a 701 manual, or a copy of a 701, I don't know. Anyway, he had a 701 manual, he gave us all. And he says, that's what I mean by a machine. And he sort of went into this general idea of what he meant by thinking by machine. And I don't remember much details about that lecture or that seminar discussion, but I remember taking that 701 manual home that night, having never seen a computer before. And I read the thing from cover to cover, and I remember it went all through the night, and by the time I finished reading that manual, I knew what it was I was going to do. And it had nothing to do with getting a job as an EE, like my parents wanted me to do. It was, stay with Simon and do more of this. So then I knew I needed money in the summer. Simon got me a fellowship for the fall. That was no problem, but I needed money to live on. My parents didn't have that much, so that meant working in the summer. Well, working IBM. That was where the IBM job came in.
That was great. So in those days, you could apply for graduate school and get admitted a little more quickly now. If you make your decision in January or February to go into graduate school in the fall, I guess, well, Herb could pull strings.
Oh, this was one-on-one with Herb.
Yeah.
I don't know what the process was, but in fact, the one-on-one, I mean, it's a different kind of graduate school experience than you would experience now. There were no courses. That's why when as you know, from 68, when you got here, 68? That when you got here, anyway, you know that I was pushing the idea that there shouldn't be any courses in our department. That just came from Herb. Whatever you want to learn in courses, you can learn on your own. The PhD is a research training apprenticeship. So it was just one-on-one with Herb. I had to pass some exams. There was a marketing exam. Alan Newell was a graduate student with me. So Alan had to pass these same exams. So he and I studied together for the marketing exam.
Well, I believe he got his PhD right away. I mean, like 56 or something like that.
No, I don't think so. Maybe 57 or 8. But I know he and I were studying from a marketing textbook together to pass this marketing exam.
Okay. Well,
but he didn't get it right away.
I looked it up on dissertation abstracts this morning, and it was dated 55 or 56, and it was called Information Processing Machines or something. But I might be wrong about this. But certainly he he was 10 years older than you, but he had dropped out of graduate school in mathematics. He had started studying pure math at Princeton, and then he decided that wasn't for him, and so this was his second career. But certainly he was. I agree that he got his degree with Simon, and undoubtedly still hadn't decided his studying days were over. So.
No, he went to Carnegie Tech specifically, to work with Simon, but
Right.
also what got him, the motivation to go away from the West Coast was partly that he could get his PhD.
Yes.
With
Right.
her.
But I think he's also still, even if he has a PhD, he probably is still interacting with you. Anyway, I might also have misread the date on his thesis, but
I think you misread it
Yeah.
because he and I were studying together for exams.
okay. And of course, there's a language exam too, as you mentioned before, which you had. So there was something besides just one-on-one work there in order to meet the university regulations.
So,
Yeah.
Don, let me just add in something which about this period, which to me, as an experience, it was quite significant. When I got back from, it's a little story about the first paper I ever delivered at a scientific conference. And it was actually a real paper also. I was one of the few people in town who could program a 650. There was Perlis, Van Zoren, and Smith, and another graduate student named Fred Tong knew how to program the 650, and me. So for a few months, actually, until the rest of the campus got aware of this machine, we had it pretty much to ourselves, and I learned the IT language very rapidly as soon as I got back to Carnegie. So I could do a little bit of magic that other people couldn't do. And I was taking a course. I knew I had to pass an economics exam sometime in this graduate school experience. So I figured I better learn some economics. So I took a course from Dick Seiert. Dick Seiert later became president of Carnegie Tech, later Carnegie Mellon. Excellent economist. Dick was teaching a course in microeconomics. Well, microeconomics has to do with how actual companies make decisions about things. And usually it's treated very coarsely by economists who only know about writing out equations that you can differentiate and set to zero and find a maximum or a minimum. But here was Herb Simon with a paper called A Behavioral Theory of Rational Choice. Let's put that into economics. So I'm really not a scholar at that point, I'm just a student. But Dick Seiert and Jim March were scholars, and I could do the programming. So the three of us, for my term paper for Dick's course, the three of us did a paper in which we did American Can Company and Continental Can Company in a duopoly, making decisions about the price and quantity of things they were going to put on the market, and then we were making predictions from the simulation written in IT as to what would happen in that market, and then testing that against what actually did happen during the American and Continental Can duopoly. And it was really great. It was really, it started off, that was kicked off a big project that later resulted in a book by March and Seiert called Behavioral Theory of the Firm, and it led to many theses, not mine. I was being Simonized into doing human information processing, but March and Seiert continued it on in economic theory. And when we wrote the paper, well, first thing that happened is we sent it into the American Economic Review, 1958, and no way this was not economics. You couldn't use a computer to run a simulation to do economics. That was 58. In 59, they had already gotten the clue, and they ran a special issue on simulation. but we had to publish it in another journal called Behavioral Science. But that was a significant publication, and those two guys, March and Syrett, gave me the job of presenting the paper at the American Economic Review December conference. So that's where I got to do my first public presentation.
So you're 21 or 22?
Well, let's see, I was
Yeah.
58 probably,
yeah.
so I was
22.
22, yeah.
Yeah. Now, so you had one-on-one also with the IBM 650?
Yeah. It's personal computer.
Right.
I loved it. I loved
Did
it. I
you-
loved the lights. I loved pressing the switches.
Did you write code like for IPL later on for
Yeah.
or things like that?
So IPL1 was a paper language.
Mm-hmm.
IPL2 was rapidly implemented within a period of 2 months maybe, or 3 months, by Cliff Shaw at the Rand Corporation, with a lot of contribution and steering by Alan Newell. They had Rand had allowed them to put in a teletype connection between Al's apartment or Al's house in Pittsburgh and Cliff's office.
Wow.
So they were able to exchange a lot. And IPL2 came along, and in fact, the logic theory program that was presented to the Dartmouth conference, this so-called kickoff conference for AI, the one that McCarthy had organized, was actually written in IPL2, and that was the first. It actually first ran on
Yeah.
a computer in IPL2.
Right.
Well, then Newell and Shaw were doing experiments rapidly. They did an IPL3, which was carrying IPL2 to an extreme, and it was too extreme, so it was quickly abandoned. Then they proceeded on to a new set of ideas called IPL4 for the Joniac. Now, IPL4's ideas seemed to be well honed enough that they could be tuned, made a little bit better, and to produce the first public list processing language for a machine that a lot of people had. I think, in fact, maybe in the interim there may have been a version called IPL 650 that Fred Tong wrote based on IPL 4. But IPL 5 was the first big public language, and we did a manual. I think you even mentioned this in your oral history. You did the manual first so that the system would conform to the manual. Well, this is what we did with IPL 5.
That's good, okay. So
And then I got to do the implementation of it in the summer at Rand.
IPL 5 was running on several computers or just one?
Well, it was running on the 709, I think by that time. The 704 had been replaced with the 709, but that was quickly replaced by a 7090, 7094. So that whole series of computers were running IPL 5.
Out at Rand?
No, anywhere. I mean,
Anywhere.
It was Rand where I did the writing and debugging.
Okay. And
In Summers.
And the Joniac was also at Rand, or was
Yeah,
that at?
Joniac was at Rand.
Yeah.
The Joniac's down the hall here now in the Computer History Museum.
Good. I'm just wondering, as you're a graduate student, what it's like using the computers in those days. You know, you're punching the cards. You're not submitting them to somebody else, right?
No, that's right. That's a great thing. That is one of the great things that happened at Carnegie. I don't know how it was at MIT, but at Carnegie, there was no staff between you and the computer. You could book time on the computer, but then you went to the computer and did your thing.
So what I mean is, was it the same at Rand? Was it the same at IBM?
No.
Was it the same,
No.
Cambridge or something?
At Rand, they on the Joniac, you could use the machine just by going up to it and running things.
Mm-hmm.
The IBM machines, there were no such thing as operating systems.
Right.
There were people called operators.
Right, okay.
And you would write out instructions to them as to what to do, what tapes to mount. Here's a card deck, run it this way. If it stops, do this. And one of the great things about having an operator is that they're humans that you can become friends with and you can persuade. And if you are in desperate shape, like you
Right.
just can't stand one run a day, you really need to stay overnight, and God, these guys could run your job between everybody else's job and give you one pass every hour or something like that. And that's what I would do. I'd make friends with them and stay up all night and do that.
But at Carnegie, you didn't have to.
No.
You were the operator there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got to tell, I think it's important to tell a story. You alluded to it in not the same story, but you alluded to the idea in your oral history. And it's been very important for my career, and I view it as the experimental approach to computer science, as opposed to the theoretical approach to computer science. And the story is, when I was, we'll get to it in the timeline, but I ended up in 59 at the National Physical Laboratory in England, in Teddington. And the machine that Turing had helped to design, the Pilot Ace, was still being built there, but it was running. And I saw a guy sitting at the console of that a lot, and I never got to meet him, and I never introduced myself to him, but it turned out to be Jim Wilkinson. And later on, at a lecture at Stanford, the Forsyth lecture at Stanford, Wilkinson describes how he's sitting at that console at NPL, and he's watching the lights flash. And they are undergoing a periodicity that it was unexpected to him as a numerical analyst. There shouldn't have been that periodicity in the lights moving back and forth. And he says, that's how I discovered, whatever we give him such great credit for. It's really important to be in touch with the machine, as opposed to the way Maurice Wilkes was running the EDSAC. And two of my friends, my two best friends in England, were Roger Needham, at that time, Roger Needham and Karen Spark-Jones. Roger's dead now, very famous, as you know, very famous computer scientist. Karen Spark-Jones just won the Alan Newell Award at the ACM. And they wanted to know all about list processing, because, in fact, they really didn't know about higher level languages, because Wilkes's view was the EDSAC time was too valuable to waste it on translating languages. And furthermore, you had to shove your cards through a slot and get your paper output the next morning. Bad idea.
Okay. So, I guess we're getting a little ahead to England there. So your first conference paper is about microeconomics, and you're helping people as the computer guru. Just like I did with Latin squares in my own career a few years later. So then, but the main work that you did on your thesis then is to figure out something about the way human beings work.
Yes.
So let's talk about the EPAM. How the idea came to you, etc. And
EPAM stands for Elementary Perceiver and Memorizer. Mm-hmm. It was a computer simulation model. Now, by that I mean I'm mentioning the technique, or the methodology, of elementary information processes that we thought were going on in the mind while certain kinds of tasks were being done. So there's a model of mind, and the particular tasks happen to be classical tasks that psychologists do with their hordes of undergraduates.
For example?
I'll tell you. And these tasks were sort of, I think they were invented by William James and Ebbinghaus back in the plus or minus 1900, around there. But they are tasks in the learning of nonsense verbal material. So if you're trying to understand basic learning without learning that doesn't have meaning attached to it, what are the phenomena of that? So they would have long lists of nonsense trigrams that were actually compiled and available, and you can use them standard, like DAX is a nonsense trigram.
Okay.
JIR, those
yeah. And-
Okay.
And some of them, one of them was DNA, probably. Was
maybe.
nonsense at the time.
At the time.
Yeah.
No, they always had to have a vowel in the middle.
Oh, okay.
And consonants on the end.
Okay.
And they were actually seriously ranked, I mean, by a lot of work. They were ranked in terms of how nonsensical they were. Over the years, they had produced long lists of these things. These nonsense syllables were presented either in pairs, which you might call an input and an output pair. See this, say that. And the order of the pairs was randomized from what's called trials to trial, learning experience to learning experience, until the subject got it right, all the pairs. Or the nonsense items were sequenced, so that you'd have a list of 10 or a list of 12, and there were phenomena associated with serial learning, there were phenomena associated with paired associate learning. There was certain kinds of errors that subjects would make. There was a distribution of those errors of different types, and a variety of phenomena that were well codified in the psychological literature. One of the most stable elementary pieces of the psychological literature.
It was a repeatable experiment. Different scientists would get the same result.
Not only, yes,
Yeah.
and not only that, you didn't have to do it, we at Carnegie Tech didn't have to do it in our laboratory. There were hundreds and thousands of those that had been done, and they were all summarized beautifully in the Handbook of Experimental Psychology by Carl Hovland, in an article which came out more or less that time. And there was, and people were busy doing new things in that area too. There was a Scientific American article about it roughly at that time. So I was fortunate in that when I got back from IBM and showed up in Herb's office in September of 1956 and said, here I am. And of course, Herb's attitude was, you don't do courses, this is research. Here's a problem. Go think about that. What's regular about, how can you make sense of this literature?
I see.
And what are some underlying principles that where you could pick 2 or 3 principles and it would give rise to everything. You could explain all these results. And maybe, I mean, he didn't say this, but as it turned out, it worked out that way, predict some. It's not just explain it. So I got to work on that. He and Al Newell were doing other things. They were doing exactly the same thing with regard to richer human problem solving. This was not a rich problem solving task. This was a perception task. You perceived characteristics of nonsense trigrams, and you learned features of them and produced output. But they were working on GPS, a general problem solver, and their problem set, what I might call their sandbox, their experimental domain, was either puzzle solving or trigonometric identities. Both of those show up in their book, Human Problem Solving, which was published in 1972. And that was more complex, that was means ends analysis, much bigger program, but both were started at about the same time.
This is, I'm not quite sure, but there was this logic theory machine which would just be able to tell whether a logical argument was correct, but then they wanted to say, now how would somebody actually construct a proof?
Yeah.
And so
Let
they were beginning to work on it.
me unravel that. That's a real good question. Prior to GPS, there was let me say, the launching platform for essentially all of heuristic programming, the heuristic programming mainstream of AI that lasted for 20 years or so. That was a thing called the logic theorist. That was what Newell and Simon were working on in the fall of 1955, and that came to a head on December 15th, 1955. Mm-hmm. That was a proof-finding program, not a proof-checking program.
I see. Proof-finding, okay.
The intent was to, well, first of all, it was not an attempt to rigorously compare the output of the program with exactly what a human would do in that situation. It was more of the, let's feel it out, and we'll get to that later, but right now we're just going to make it do something. On the other hand, all the insights were from what you might call, by introspection, from Herb Simon and Al Newell, of what was going on in their heads. And what were the problems? The problems were the theorems of Chapter 2 of Whitehead and Russell. Now, why did they choose Principia? Why did they choose Principia? The reason is that it was a brilliant choice. Choose the propositional calculus because you don't have to deal with anything having to do with the semantics of the world. You just have P's, Q's, and R's, and rules for manipulating.
Okay.
So and they came up with the idea of the domain, the search for solutions in a space, and then pruning. That was an enormous space of possibilities, and then pruning that space using various kinds of heuristics, like, for example, if you happen to generate, by going down one of these paths, if you happen to generate a formula which has a lot of negations in it, give it up, because chaining back through not P implies P is just too hard. It just gets you into a lot of tangles. So forget it. There's got to be another path which will get you there.
So this is one of their expert rules in order to prune off probable unfruitful lines.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And they're working both forward and backward.
No, in this particular case, they were, I think it was just they were just working.
Going from the hypothesis.
They had a theorem to prove, and they were going down to the axioms.
Okay.
But anyway, the logic theorist was published. Its first manifestation was in the 1956 IEEE journal, where Chomsky had his famous paper. Mm-hmm. It was done in, I believe, September after that Dartmouth conference. They brought it to the Dartmouth conference. They published it in September in the IEEE, and a little bit later on, they published it in, of all places, Psychological Review, which is the main kind of theoretical journal for psychology. Mm-hmm. So it was almost simultaneously published in two kinds of fields, psychology and what we now call computer science or information processing science.
So GPS went beyond this in what way?
GPS was an attempt to pull out a more uniform mechanism and organize it in a way where it could be applied to many different problem domains. It's a trick that repeatedly we've done in AI, and repeatedly I've done in my own work. For example, we did I wasn't specifically involved in detail, but my lab did it. Buchanan and Shortlift did a medical diagnosis program called MySIN. And we abstracted from MySIN the core of it and called it eMySIN for essential MySIN or empty MySIN, and that became the basis of hundreds of copies or thousands of copies of rule-based software.
I see. So in other words, the logic theory machine is working on Whitehead and Russell, but now you could also use the same paradigms for, let's say, trigonometry.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Now, it's not exactly the same, because in GPS, Newell and Simon imported from some earlier work of Herb Simon's, earlier, going way, way back to the book Administrative Behavior. Footnote about that book a little later. A thing called means-ends analysis, working back and forth between...
Both ways.
Both ways,
okay.
right.
And new paradigms.
New paradigm.
So, better paradigm.
Here's where I am. Here's the goal that I've set for myself. What's the difference between where I am and the goal? Well, let's set out to reduce the differences one at a time. Now I make a step. Now I'm here and there's a goal. What's the difference between where I am and the goal? Let's reduce the difference. Finally, you get to the point where, hey, I'm really there, and I have no more to do.
Trying to find a good way to quantify the difference between two concepts or states of progress.
States of the problem.
Yeah.
Now, there is a critical issue here which didn't come up for Newell and Simon. It didn't come up explicitly, but I got to tell you that it was there implicitly because I saw it. I mentioned that in the logic theorists, they avoided the question of real-world knowledge because it didn't matter what the P's, Q's, and R's were. Then they went on to GPS, and so you can't get GPS to solve a problem until you tell GPS something about the problem. The question is, how much do you have to tell it? They boil that down to a thing called the operator difference table, meaning if I measure a difference between where I am and where I'm going, there's some operator that's relevant to making the step, and let's try that. The operator difference table for, say, trigonometry that they used was really very small. I can't remember the exact number of entries in it, but I mean, I could draw it out on one Excel sheet, I think. Which means that the amount of real-world knowledge that they were pumping into GPS to do trigonometry was very small. But that could be because the trigonometric identity symbols really have very little meaning. They're a system closed in on themselves.
Well, they had to start, they probably didn't want to start with the hardest problem. They wanted to start
that's right.
with something that would give experience.
No, it was more than that. It was that they were looking, their mindset was on problem-solving processes, problem-solving processes, not world-class behavior, not getting the job done, but what is the best model of a human doing problem-solving? In fact, they do a brilliant job in their book in 1972 of matching human thinking aloud protocols of trigonometric problem-solving with exactly what GPS is saying at each point. And
but then other people develop theories that are better for machines and humans can't do it all. I mean, to automatic simplification programs now in your symbol languages now use fancy algorithms that
yes, absolutely.
that are completely different from the way.
Yeah, and the issue you're mentioning arose immediately. It arose in who brought it up? Wang, I think, brought it up in 1956 when they published The Logic Theorist, and he just said this is a ridiculous way to prove theorems in propositional calculus. There's this algorithm you can use, and it will do it all in 5 seconds.
Yes.
And to which the answer is, we knew that, but that's not what we're out after. We're not looking for that.
Exactly. Yeah. We get into that all the time. People say, why do you do an experiment in order to learn something when you can get the answers to all your toy problems by other means? And now, you know, why teach anybody to write a computer program if there's a library, if there's already one on the web that does it or something like this? And how is anybody ever going to learn something? You know, if they don't.
Yeah, I agree.
If they don't know the problem-solving process. Yes.
Let me just mention two things. One is to reinforce what you just said about experiment. Experiment turns out to be absolutely vital, and I've asked myself, at least for me, and I noticed for Herb Simon, even though he was a great mind, and Al Newell was a great mind. Al Newell was the ultimate experimentalist. I mean, he was a hands-on, I will program everything just like you. Just really down it. And Herb would go to lectures with a big printout in front of him, and while the lecture was going on, he'd be debugging his code. But the other thing I want to mention is what an amazing, what shall I call it? I could use an astronomical term. I can use a Kunzian term, which is to say a paradigm shift or a revolution in thought, or you can use an astronomical term, which is a supernova of thought, was this 1956 introduction, or 56 and 57 introduction by Simon and Newell, and then also beefed up by the EPRAM results of trying to understand thinking in concrete terms, where everything had to be explicated. Before that, books on thinking, you get all the literature, they're all words. It's all English language, which means you don't confront all the issues.
It's so easy to forget how much we don't know until we try to explain it to a computer.
Yeah, exactly right, exactly right.
What you're saying is, to me, the thing that differentiates computer scientists' ways of doing things from others most strongly is the way they jump levels, high level to low level, and they're working sort of simultaneously on all levels at once. As you say, he's debugging his program and he's listening to a lecture and so on. But you have to see things in the small and in the large end. And that's what a facility for that seems to be what brings people together, and they meet other people that have that same facility, and they become friends because of that, rather than because they have a goal to do some computation. They're really, the community comes from the fact that they share this talent for jumping levels.
Yeah.
It's off the subject, though.
No, it's not off the subject.
And so anyway, I think it's good. We set the scene. We see now we're at a time when there are just computers starting to enter the world, and people are seeing, hey, these computers can actually we can actually use them to do things that are able to check things that scientists have been doing, studying human beings. Now we can actually do simulations and see if these models are at all complete, or if there's something that wasn't captured by the people who didn't have a way to check it. And so here we are in a brand new world, and it's very exciting, and people are coming together, like at the Dartmouth conference, and seeing that there's this potential that we can do, that these machines might be able to do fantastic things. Who knows what they're going to be? This is a very exciting time to live, and I can also see why people might also want to make very optimistic predictions at that time as to how long it would take to translate languages or play world-class chess. And so this is at this time you are if I understand it, then Herb says, here's this field of study with these nonsense symbols and so on. Are these models? What do we have to do in order to validate these experiments by actually implementing them precisely and getting to the bottom of it?
Yeah. Right. So we're there were some clues lying around. You have to sort of pick up breadcrumbs in the forest. And one of the clues was in the post-World War II era of cyberneticians, there were some people in the MIT area that came from psychology. George Miller being one of them, Licklider being another one, and there were several others who are...
McCulloch and Pitts?
McCulloch was, he was actually a psychiatrist, and he speculated about neural mechanisms. But these other guys were actually working on psychological things, like Miller had this famous paper called The Magical Number 7 plus or minus 2, in which he did experiments on the span of immediate attention. Well, there were some that had to do with, Neisser was another one, Ulrich Neisser. Well, some of them had to do with choice reaction time. And it turned out to be the reaction time was related to the log of the number of events. So once you see that, and the number of choices, once you see that, you know that some kind of a tree is happening underneath. So the first thing I invented was a thing called the discrimination net, in which started out as nothing when the learner starts, and then the learner under an assumption that, it's kind of an efficiency assumption, similar to what a physicist might make, path of least energy, of doing the least amount. Just differentiate what you have to differentiate. If you have a nonsense syllable like DAX and one like JAR, it's well known that people, from other results, that people will discriminate on the ends of those before they discriminate on the middle. So just discriminate between a D and a J, that's all you have to do. Okay. And leave a little Q around that lets you, the D, for example, well, no, I can't say, yeah, the D is a closed loop and the J is not. So there's a feature that you can discriminate on. Well, it turns out that list structures had just been invented by us, and no one had tried to grow these trees. So, but I had to, because I would start with two nonsense syllables in the net, and then the next pair would come in and they'd have to grow into the net somewhere. So these were the first growing trees, first adaptively growing trees. Now, here's the amazing and kind of stupid thing, but it just shows what it means to focus your attention on X rather than Y. We were focused on psychology. We were not focused on what is now called computer science. So we never really published anything about those trees, except as they related to the psychological model. But other people saw trees as a thing to write papers about.
I think Ed Fredkin.
Ed Fredkin, tree memory, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, I might have become well-known in some other area if I had just thought of it, but we weren't thinking that way. That's I think, very important to...
Well, from a historical standpoint, this is really, trees were sort of downplayed in all of mathematics and so on until computers came along. When we started having things like recursion but branching, and you started out with IPL5, and IPL5 has lists that are one-dimensional, and the next step is to have two links where you can go two ways instead of one, and it seems obvious in retrospect, but really it wasn't a common model at all in people's minds, and it wasn't until later that we saw really that trees were everywhere somehow.
Don, I'd like to pick up on a couple loose ends that we were talking about, just make some comments on them before I forget them. One is about list structures. The list structures of IPL5, and I actually can't tell you for sure about IPL2, but the list structures at IPL5, of course, every list structure had a name, so that's the object name. It represented an object. But if the object had structure, it was either a list or a list of lists of lists of lists of lists of lists, namely a structure.
Okay.
But aside from the structure, it also had attributes, and those attributes had values. So there was what's called a description list that was hanging off the name of the object, which was attribute value, attribute value, attribute value. The color is red, the size is large, something like that. Mm-hmm. Well, that was heavily used as a programming mechanism by us, by Newell and Simon and myself and others. Years later, it was reinvented, and it was called object-oriented programming. But object-oriented programming was invented right there in doing that programming. And it was made pretty, and it was made public, and all that. It was just like McCarthy gave a name to a search technique, pruning technique called alpha beta, which, of course, you've written a lot about. But when McCarthy first did that, Art Samuel and Al Newell looked at it and said, well, of course, but everybody, you wouldn't program any other way. This is silly to call it, you know, we've been doing it. It's like I've been writing prose my whole life.
It's true. I would add, object-oriented programming also included the idea of an executable procedure as part of an object.
We also had that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any one of those symbols could stand for a program that you just dumped into the interpretive stack, and it got done. Incidentally, that's a good point. These were interpreters, not compilers.
Right.
It was way later before there was a compiler. I think even Lisp, early Lisp, was strictly interpretive.
I'm I'm willing to predict that in the next 20 years, interpreters will be rediscovered at least 3 times too, as to how important they are.